I find myself envying Kento Nanami, a man who, despite being fictional, somehow managed to answer a question that plagues so many of us. What is our purpose amidst the chaos? Nanami had the rare privilege in the world of Jujutsu Kaisen to live both as a sorcerer and as a salaryman. He experienced two worlds, one fueled by adrenaline and danger, the other by monotony and routine. This duality gave him a perspective most sorcerers lack. He wasn't blinded by the self-righteousness that so often accompanies power. In his own words to Yuji, Jujutsu sorcerers are horrible. But this is not to say he thought working was amazing. As a matter of fact, he goes on to say working is just as bad. But then he says something profound. If both are equally horrible, I'll take the one I'm more suited to. As a sorcerer, Nanami never seemed to struggle with the same internal dilemmas that plagued his peers. Instead, he moved quietly through life, carrying out his duty without the need for recognition or glory. His goal was simple: to help as many people as he could, even if it meant working in silence. While his demeanor was often reserved, even pessimistic, it was clear to those who knew him that he cared deeply for the people around him, especially his closest friend, Haibara, who was everything Nanami was not. Haibara was the light to Nanami's quiet shadow, brimming with optimism and driven by a desire to prove himself. Their bond was one of those rare connections where differences create balance. Haibara's vibrant spirit burned brightly, but perhaps that's the tragedy. Jujutsu Kaisen mirrors real life in showing us how those with the fiercest flames are often the first to be extinguished. To understand Nanami, the sorcerer, is to understand the depth of his connection with Haibara and the scar left by his death. Haibara's death was a reminder of how brutally unforgiving their world is, and Nanami watched it happen. He saw that in a world like theirs, good people, bright people, are often the first to go. A lesson Yuji would learn with Junpei's death. Nanami carried this loss, this bitterness quietly, and it became the lens through which he saw the futility of fighting for a cause that ultimately strips meaning from its fighters. His decision to leave was not out of anger or resentment, but out of understanding. A tired, resigned understanding of both the world of sorcery and the inevitable fallout that comes with it. When Geto walked away and killed all those people, Nanami might not have agreed with his actions, but he understood them. He saw in Geto's departure a reaction to a system that never truly values what it costs people to stay. To be a Jujutsu sorcerer is to accept that you are, at some level, a replaceable cog in a machine that treats human life with stark indifference. It was quite different for sorcerers like Gojo, who hold overwhelming power. They may seem untouchable, almost mythic. Their strength shields them from the vulnerability most sorcerers face every day. Yet it's a power that also separates them, a privilege that becomes isolating in itself. But for a sorcerer like Nanami, the risk is palpable and always omnipresent. He knows how close death lurks, lingering in the recklessness of those in power. Haibara's death embodies this bitter truth. Losing his best friend due to the higher-ups' failure to communicate critical information wasn't an accident, but rather a testament to a deeply ingrained disregard for young sorcerers' lives. To them, these are merely casualties of war. The reactions of Nanami and Geto to Haibara's death highlight the painful divide between duty and despair. Geto, witnessing the pointless nature of Riko's death and the dismissive mockery of non-sorcerers who cannot grasp the weight of these sacrifices, became disillusioned. Haibara's death was a turning point for him, a catalyst that solidified his departure from a world that, barely values the lives it claims to protect. Similarly, Nanami came to this disheartening truth. To continue fighting without questioning is to risk becoming complicit. Driven by this realization, Nanami sought meaning beyond the system, something that would allow him to reclaim a sense of autonomy from a structure that only pretends to care. It's in Haibara's death that Nanami's understanding of what it means to be a sorcerer transforms. He realized that genuine care for the younger generation goes beyond mere instruction. It requires protecting them from the very system they've sworn loyalty to. This conviction shapes his relationship with Yuji. When Nanami tells him he doesn't yet recognize him as a sorcerer, it's not a judgment. Rather, it's an act of quiet rebellion and a warning. To Nanami, recognizing Yuji as a sorcerer, or as an adult, would mean surrendering him to the same cycle that took Haibara, one in which innocence is extinguished by duty. Nanami's reluctance to see Yuji as a fellow sorcerer reflects his desire to preserve Yuji's humanity for as long as possible. As he says, being a child is not a sin. He's seen the cost of commitment without question, and in Haibara's memory, he chooses to challenge it. By withholding this recognition, Nanami tries, in his own way, to protect Yuji from the fate that haunts every young sorcerer, the risk of being consumed by a system that forgets its fallen, and quickly replaces them with fresh faces. This act of withholding is Nanami's way of ensuring that Yuji understands the reality he's entering, one that he might still have the chance to avoid or at least approach with open eyes. But of course, after Yuji's battle with Mahito, he accepts his role as a cog in a machine. When Nanami stepped away from the world of sorcery, hoping to find a sense of purpose beyond the brutal cycles of battle and sacrifice, he instead fell into a hollow pursuit. He found himself entrenched in the corporate world, chasing money, a different yet equally draining cycle, devoid of the meaning he sought. In leaving sorcery behind, he had hoped to escape the relentless demands on his humanity. But he discovered that survival without purpose felt just as suffocating. His detachment from sorcery didn't bring him freedom. Instead, it underscored the very emptiness he sought to avoid. As I mentioned at the beginning, the pursuit of surface goals like wealth, pleasure, or even duty is never the true destination. These are distractions from the deeper, unspoken quest for purpose, the only thing that makes all other pursuits worthwhile. Nanami's struggle illuminates this with haunting clarity. Though he may represent the pragmatic, even cynical side of the sorcerer's life, he embodies the human condition more profoundly than most. In his journey, we see the conflict between finding meaning in the world and being overwhelmed by its harsh realities. Even though he says otherwise, I'm a person who's never gotten the concept of reason for living, or something worth doing. I figure I'll just earn enough money by the time I'm 30 or 40 to enjoy the rest of my aimless life in some country with a low cost of living. It's been 4 years since I left the school. Now, whether I'm awake or asleep, all I think about is money. Curses and other people have nothing to do with me, as long as I have money. Money, 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 money. As long as I have money. Nanami's character arc, as crafted by Gege, is as much a mirror as it is a revelation. We as readers see what's happening to him, but he doesn't. Nanami is every person who has never truly had a choice, whose life has been dictated by circumstance, and whose dreams were quietly extinguished by fear. Life didn't happen because of him, it happened to him. Hence the familiar feeling of pursuing money. He claims he doesn't understand the purpose of seeking meaning. But that's a lie. One, he tells himself to endure the monotony. His entire journey is steeped in the silent, invisible battle of trying to find his role in a world where control feels like an illusion. Where I envy Nanami is where I see his growth. While many of us dream of conquering the storm, he found a way to move within it. And this is what makes his final moments so memorable. Even as he dies, there's a grace in his movements, a quiet dignity born from a man who has made peace with his purpose. His life wasn't marked by glory, wealth, or recognition, but by the simple joy of making an observable difference, not out of obligation, but because it was a choice he embraced. Nanami's choice wasn't glamorous. It was riddled with pain and sacrifice, but it was his. And in that stillness, in that acceptance, he altered the path for those who followed. For Yuji, Nanami didn't need to be Gojo, blazing through life with boundless energy. He wasn't meant to be. He was the light of hope for the ordinary. He found his purpose not in defiance of the storm, but in harmony with it. And by doing so, he changed it for someone else. That's the quiet beauty of his character. The choice he never had is reclaimed in his abandonment of the sorcerer's life. The second time Nanami picks up the mantle, it's not out of obligation, nor is it born from blind optimism. It's a decision made in full awareness of its cost. But this time, he refuses to be just another cog in the machine. He reclaims his agency, stepping into the role on his own terms. This brings us to a common misconception. The belief that living in one's truth is inherently tied to positive outcomes. It's a comforting lie, one we cling to in a world that often feels chaotic. But the reality is harsher. Every choice we make carries weight, and that weight isn't always balanced by the rewards we envision. In most cases, the positive aspects of our decisions exist in a vacuum, internal, isolated, and limited to us. Nanami's choice to return to sorcery embodies this. It gives him purpose. He feels the satisfaction of contributing to something greater. And yet, the suffering doesn't vanish. The pain persists. His path is riddled with sacrifice, but he doesn't let that invalidate the meaning he's found. We often grapple with the weight of our own choices because we've been sold a false promise that kindness will be met with respect, that doing the right thing ensures recognition or reward. It's an entitlement we have no right to claim. Life is indifferent, and it doesn't owe us anything for living authentically. Nanami's story is proof of this indifference. The consequences of living your truth don't unfold in a vacuum, untouchable by the world around you. They ripple outward, colliding with the unpredictable chaos of life. But that's the point. The beauty of his choice lies not in its external validation, but in the quiet strength it takes to make it despite the cost. Nanami's truth isn't perfect. It isn't painless, but it's his, and that's what makes it powerful.